Welcome to this module of Professor Messer's free CompTIA A+ certification training course. I'm James Messer, and in this module, we're going to talk about an introduction to personal computers. This comes from our CompTIA A+ requirements 220-701, section 1.2. And this particular section of the CompTIA exam hopes that you will understand a lot of different things about a motherboard. Look at all of these different components we have to know: I/O interfaces, memory slots, processor sockets, and bus architectures, and et cetera, and et cetera, and et cetera. If you've never touched a computer before, you've never opened the case of a computer before, all of this is a bit of a mystery. Hopefully at the end of this video today, you'll be a lot more comfortable with the things that you're seeing inside of your computer. We're going to take apart a computer. I'm going to show you exactly what's inside of a system that I have here, and we'll be able to piece together exactly what you can expect to find in any computer you'll run into. We'll start with the outside, and we'll look at the different components that you have outside of your computer, and then we'll open it up. We'll look at what a power supply is like, what you can find on the motherboard, what the CPU settings are really like inside of your computer, and I'll also give you a primer on how a computer works on the inside, what you can expect when you're looking at a program operating in your computer, what's really going on there, how does it really operate, and we'll put all of these pieces together for you. The outside of your computer, relatively straightforward, not a lot of different pieces because almost everything is contained in the primary system unit that you have. But of course, on your system, you've got to have some way to see the information that the computer is telling you about. This output screen, something that we call a monitor. And the monitor is probably LCD based if it's a newer computer, but it may be some of the older cathode ray tubes or CRT monitors, which are really big and glass and bulky. And you don't see a lot of them anymore. It's hard to buy them anymore, but almost every single computer is going to have some type of monitor on it so that you can get output of your system and see what's there. You've probably also got a keyboard and a mouse on your computer. These days, those can be usually two separate components, or you have a separate keyboard and a separate mouse. If you're working in a data center, you may find that the mouse is actually part of the keyboard, or if you're on a laptop, for instance, the mouse is integrated into the keyboard piece. And so sometimes those are two separate pieces, two separate physical components separated out. Sometimes those two components are encapsulated or brought together on a single platform. They're still considered a separate keyboard and separate mouse. They just happen to be in the same unit itself. And finally, we have the computer itself. Some people will refer to this as your CPU. Technically, of course, the CPU is a chip that is inside of your computer case, but we often refer to that of the CPU that you happen to be connected to. You may also find these days, especially things like the Apple iMacs, for instance, the monitor and the computer are all in one. You just have a monitor and a keyboard and mouse. There's no separate computer anymore. So sometimes everything that you would normally find inside of your computer case just now is starting to become part of the monitor itself. We still refer to that as the computer components, though, and we'll step through what you can expect to find inside of that system, whether it's one that's integrated together with a monitor or whether it's the more traditional separate computer that's out separately away from all of these different pieces. But all the real action is inside of your computer. All the really good stuff is happening inside of the system. And normally we don't get to see that. There's a case, there are screws you must unscrew to get the top off of that or to get the side off of your system. Before you go into your computer, the one rule of thumb that you always must follow whenever you're taking a cover off of a computer is to unplug it from its power source. Make sure it does not have a way to power up once you unplug that cover, once the inside components are accessible to you. That way you can be sure that you are never going to be in a situation where there is an accidental case of electricity flowing into you. We don't want that to happen. That can be absolutely a fatal type of situation. So it's just something to keep in mind. Very simple. You unplug and you're safe. That type of safety tip is always good. People send me messages all the time at ProfessorMesser.com and say, I never unplug my system. I just take the cover off and I'm perfectly fine. Well, that's certainly the case. As long as you don't touch the wrong thing, you'll be fine. The problem, of course, is when you accidentally do touch the wrong thing. There are some very, very, very powerful electrical pieces inside. So if you're ever going to do this, just make sure you unplug from a power source. So what I did was take a system that I had so that I could show you what's inside of mine. Now, my system itself is one that has, it's designed to go as a server. It's very flat. So when I take the cover off, I'm able to see almost everything inside the system just by taking its top cover off. So it's a really good one to use for this example. Your system, when you take it apart, may not be designed this way. The different components may be on top of each other, may be hard to see underneath different pieces. But everything in your system probably does have exactly the same type of components, even though it's designed just a little bit differently on the inside. Let's step through what a few of these might be. Now, the one that we just talked about that's very important to unplug from is the power supply. And if we were on our system right here, on the back of it, it's kind of hard to see right down here at the bottom is where the power plugs right into this power supply. So before I did anything with this system, I unplugged it from the power supply, and now I can feel comfortable about going in here. Notice the power supply also has this big metal cover over it. There are some capacitors in there that will store power. So you want to be very careful that you're never taking this metal cover off of your power supply because there are some very high voltages in there. You will find equipment, usually it's not a personal computer, but other types of computing systems inside of data centers and other components, you'll take the cover off and the power supply will not have a metal cover on it. Be very careful about working around those types of pieces of equipment and those environments. You don't want to be in a situation where you're going to run into that. There are a lot of different kinds of power supplies, small ones, large ones, the kind that have different sizes that will fit into cases that I have. This is a relatively new one that not only has connections out to the motherboard with these types of connectivities, but also has connections onto other SATA drives that will directly connect to a SATA drive in the newer SATA power connection. Also has the more traditional, what we call a Molex, or the 4 type of connector, the 4 pin connector for power that you would plug into other more legacy type devices in your computer. The type of power supply that you use will be different depending on what your requirements are, what your power resources are required, how many drives you have in your system, the type of motherboard you have. Usually you would refer to the manufacturer of the motherboard and the computer itself to determine the wattage and the type of connectors you would need on your power supply for your system. Once you get the cover off of your computer, you're going to see this really big green circuit board on the inside of your computer. That's your motherboard. Motherboards come in all kinds of different shapes and sizes. There are a different set, maybe a handful of different, very standardized sizes so that you can buy a case separately and buy a motherboard and feel very comfortable that the case that you buy for an ATX motherboard will fit properly in there. So there is some standardization there. But the motherboard that's here, you can see, is just a really big circuit board with a lot of different pieces on it. Very easy to find inside of your system, and makes it very easy to replace a motherboard, to upgrade a motherboard, because you can simply take it out of your system and put it back in. We have other videos that you can watch that talk about doing things like that and adding a motherboard into a system. But it's very easy to find it. In this particular picture with my system, it's all very flat here. So the motherboard was very easy to see. In yours, the power supply may be right on top of it. It may be hard to see all the way in there, but it's major system, major piece of your system, very easy to find once you get the cover off of it. Motherboards, as I mentioned, come in all different shapes and sizes, and depending on your system, you may have the ability to change your motherboard out, to upgrade your system. Systems that you buy from a manufacturer like the Dells of the world and the Gateways of the world may not be as modular. They just may be very, very specific, very proprietary, and don't have a lot of upgradability. So we don't tend to replace motherboards very often to upgrade unless you're building a system for yourself and you're more of a hobbyist with this type of thing. For computers these days, it's almost less expensive to just buy a brand new computer, because not just the motherboard would be upgraded, but everything else, the hard drive, the bus that's used to connect to those drives, the CPU itself, and everything else that you would need is all built all together and made to work together, along with the video boards and everything else. So sometimes it's a little bit easier to do it that way. But you'll certainly see, as we step through our different videos in this training course, you'll begin to learn and know exactly what's on this motherboard and what all of those different components do.